If you're watching this video without having watched our other Battle Aces video, you're going to end up confused. This is just our unedited interview with David Kim, talking about the game, what's coming in the upcoming beta, what's coming in the future, and just the RTS genre and his history with strategy games as a whole. If you haven't watched that, this might confuse you. If you have watched that, this is the next video for you. Great, enjoy. Or maybe you're a rebel who likes interviews. Also, as a note, this is the second recording of our interview. The first one had no audio. We had to do it again. David was very kind and very helpful to give us his time. And so if there's any weird questions you see us ask, that's why. Anyway, enjoy and feel free to leave a comment. You had the beta 1 phase, and I was just curious, what was the most surprising feedback that you kind of didn't think about, but that was like the most helpful to you that you got from beta 1?
Oh, I see. So I think the biggest one is what I just talked about, right? So from our point of view, we thought at least the highest skill level players will understand that Battle Ace is about not only the execution of RTS, but also about kind of the deep, I guess, deck building, strategizing, unit countering, etc. Right? But when we heard the feedback that um, along the lines of like a lot of like I guess higher skilled players were describing battle aces as like things like, oh, gets the action really fun, like removes the tedious stuff that you experience in RTS, or like, oh, it's like Starcraft but without all the difficulties of APM, etc. Right?
Yeah.
And while these are all true, the surprising thing to us was, oh, but then what about that other side of the fun kind of thing, right? And then that's why we've included the new unit counter system that we're teaching, like in the second match that you ever play, as well as in the intelligence bar, we tell you exactly what counters what. And all you need to do is take, I guess, 2 seconds to mouse over a unit to check what I'm supposed to build next and what the best optimal thing is, etc. So we really wanted to kind of make sure that players experience this other type of core fun as well.
Okay. So when you kind of try to make a RTS that's evolved from that kind of rather stale design focus that like it's had for the past 20 years, and you decide to start cutting away pieces to kind of hone down the what players are going to experience, how do you approach what should be cut and what should be kept?
Yeah, so I think it boils down to kind of our highest level goal of how do we make the most fun to play RTS game, right? And maybe at a high level, our answer is fulfilling that army commander fantasy in the moment to moment gameplay. And maybe a second one is being able to strategize at all times, right? So RTS is a real-time strategy game. So traditionally, we see traditional RTS as doing a great job of the real-time part. But the strategy part over time kind of goes away, and then the games just become more about the execution than about the strategy. So an example is maybe if you take StarCraft or StarCraft 2, if you pick any matchup like Terran versus Zerg, right? The strategies being executed for the most part are the same eventually, kind of thing, right? So we wanted to make sure that we allow players that are strategizing really well can perform well, do well in this game, etc. too, right? So from this point of view, to answer your question, we would look at every game piece and every system through this lens. So we would question things like, okay, so is it really part of the core fun that players have to manage and build a worker from every single town hall once every X seconds, the whole game? And if you don't, if you forget a few times, then you might lose the game. And our answer to that was like, I don't think so. Like, we think this is in the category of, I mean, you have to do it, so you do it. But killing this is not going to hurt the core fun kind of thing. That's why we've made the change to automate worker management. So like workers do exist. So you can form your strategies around, I'm going to distract you by attacking these specific workers and then
Yeah.
attack with my main army elsewhere. Like all these exist, which we do think are the core fun. But stuff that we've decided that are yeah, these are probably not part of the core fun. We've cleaned up, either removed or heavily reduced the execution of, so that people can focus on, I guess, the execution as well as the strategy.
Yeah, from my limited experience of playing StarCraft and watching it, like it always felt that when you are playing it at the very high level, it's about plate spinning, like that base management, making sure adrenalines go out, your mules go out, all that kind of stuff, and like microing your army as well. And it feels like the moment you neglect one of those spinning plates, then that's it, you lose. Whereas with Battle Aces, it feels like you're kind of removing that. I need to juggle all of these things and kind of purifying it down to it's going to come down to win or lose how your strategy with your army actually plays out, how you engage in that combat situation.
So, yeah. So maybe a funny example, maybe from my point of view, is I worked on StarCraft 2 for a very long time, right? And then whenever people on the team or people within Blizzard, they come to me and they ask like, "Hey, I want to be better, right? I'm doing this and this strategy. Is that good? Like, should I be continuing to do this, or would you recommend something else, etc.?" Right? And then I would say, "Oh, don't worry about any of that, right? Don't worry about strategy. Don't worry about units, even, right? You can build anything you want, but the most important thing is to never stop building workers, right? And then you'll be like diamond level or maybe masters level, etc. And then you can worry about strategy after that point." And then when I like at some point I caught myself like when I'm giving this advice, which is good advice, I think, to get better. I'm like, wait a minute, but is this really the most fun version that we can experience in an RTS where like the best advice to give to someone is, yeah, practice building workers for 5 years and then you can get to master level kind of thing, right? Versus in Battle Aces, we've been working on it for 3.5 years. When someone comes for advice, it's more like, okay, so what was in play, right? What were you facing up against? Oh, if that's the case, why not try, I guess, the shocker instead of the mortar or something like that. So it's a more like strategy focused game, which we believe is a much more fun potential RTS kind of thing.
Yeah, anytime I was playing StarCraft and I was given advice by better players, it was always focus on your economy and focus on your base, like get everything sorted out. And it's like, but what about if they're rushing me, or what if they're harassing me, or what if like they're going for this strat or that strat? It's like, no, 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 ignore all of that. You like if you focus on this little core thing, that is how you improve.
And don't get me wrong, right? That's fun too, right? And that's why I guess StarCraft 2 was my favorite game of all time kind of thing, right? But um yeah, we wonder if there can be more within the RTS space is the
Yeah.
question.
So you mentioned, of course, working at Blizzard, working on StarCraft. You also worked at Relic. What was it like working at Relic? Because that's going back quite some time. There was a rather large slew of like big RTSs about to come out that were going to change things. What was it like?
Yeah, Relic was actually really fun for me because that was a long time. It's almost like 20 years ago now, right? And back then, the I guess the game development as well as studios, etc., was very different from now. Like now, I feel like a lot more is kind of more figured out. There's so many great game companies out there that make great games, etc. But back then, it was a lot more hectic, I would say, right? So when I first got my job, it was like at the time when Relic, for the first time, decided like live ops is important, like maintaining a great game post launch is important, etc. So they were just starting out creating this like game balance team where focus on maintaining the game kind of thing, right? So imagine it, I guess, like this, right? Like I was gamer, RTS gamer that plays so much, and then I would join like as many like tournaments as I can, etc. But every single person that joined the game balance team at Relic was someone like me, right? So like you have this whole team of kind of like similar, like kind of more higher skilled and super hardcore RTS players, and then we're like playtesting often, we're making balance suggestions, etc. So this was like a great, like, oh man, like I really love this type of experience, right? But then when I saw the game announcement, if Bob was there, Ted Park, he was there too, etc. Some of these guys, the whole StarCraft 2 development team at the time, they went to Korea to announce that they're working on StarCraft 2, no release date or anything like that. I saw that announcement, applied on that same day, and then got the job on that same month. And then once my visa situation was figured out, that's when I kind of joined.
That's really interesting. Like, it's very interesting to me as well how you can have all these companies like Blizzard and Relic making games like Dawn of War, Company of Heroes, and Starcraft, and they can all be that same kind of RTS, but they're so different. Like even comparing like Dawn of War to Starcraft, they are both strategy games, they're both RTS games, and yet the fundamentals of them are so different.
Yeah, for sure. But I believe at the core of it, they were all kind of chasing a similar, I guess, idea that like the genre is so hardcore, so we must do things to make it more approachable, kind of thing,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So there was a yeah, there was the original Brood War, which was I guess the peak of like super difficult, right? And then what Dawn of War did, I believe, is something like, oh, let's have squads so that you are only controlling 10 squads instead of hundreds of units kind of thing, right? And then Company of Heroes, it's like, let's cut out like the macro element of everything and allow players to just focus on the micro, the tactics, etc. Right? And then you have like something like Warcraft 3 that went like, okay, the scale was too big is why the game was so complicated in Brood War. So let's make it a really small scale hero base. So like you can kind of see
yeah,
everyone was kind of taking stabs at it, but it's in a very different way than how we are approached. Because what we're doing is it is more like we believe the core fun is the fast pace, large scale, lots of action. Like these are very hardcore things, right?
yeah.
But our method is more like let's keep these fun things though, right? And clean up everything else so that you can actually experience the exact same core fun as like a traditional RTS, but in a more approachable way, kind of thing.
But we also now kind of have those differences between like Dawn of War and StarCraft, and like when people kind of approach this, even if their backgrounds are the same, they can approach something from a different angle. Like, for example, we have you making Battle Aces, and then also, of course, we have Stormgate coming from Frost Giant, which like you both StarCraft, and yet you've come out of it going, well, this is to me is what makes an RTS, and you're focusing on completely different aspects of the genre.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I worked with Tim Martin on StarCraft 2, and then we used to talk about this kind of thing for a long time. And he's always had his vision, and which was different compared to ours, right? But there's no one right answer to make a kind of thing, right? But his idea, I believe, and when I play the game, I kind of see it very clearly too, was more like traditional RTS is awesome. So if we make the same sort of game, then that will be awesome kind of thing, right? Which is, yeah, like there's a lot of truth to that statement, right? But our approach is very different. It's more like, um, the core fun is really fun, right? But there are areas of improvement. So like I keep going back to the strategy being more amplified, I think
Yeah,
is a more fun RTS game kind of thing, right? As well as kind of cleaning up those tedious things kind of thing, right? But yeah, it's interesting how there's a lot of it's not just Stormgate too, right? There's also like Zero Space, Immortal, etc. Tempest Rising, and everyone seems to be taking a slightly different. Like Tempest Rising is taking more of a campaign focused RTS type of, and that one interests me quite a bit too, kind of thing, right? So it's very cool to see.
it's very fascinating to me how it feels like the RTS genre is so unique in a way in that it's been around for so long, and yet when people approach it to make a game over the past 20 years, it's like, okay, we're not going to necessarily change that core. Like it works so well in some people's minds, and it has such a like hardcore fan base that they will gravitate to it. And it's really interesting to me how you see other genres evolve and change a lot over time, and RTS kind of feels like it's like, no, we've already perfected the concept, and so it's crazy to see now that there are people being like, well, what actually happens if we try to change that concept? So
Yeah.
it's
So
gone.
yeah. For us, how we look at it is very similar to, I guess, some of the Blizzard games that have did, right? So maybe I could use Hearthstone as an example. Before Hearthstone, card games were a lot more, I guess, niche and a lot more complicated just to even like the rule set was so difficult. I remember like when someone tried to get me into Magic for the first time, right? I'm just like struggling, like learning the rules kind of thing, right? But then when Hearthstone came out, it's like everything's taken care of for me. Like all I need to do is focus on the fun. And I don't have to worry about all these like details or tedious aspects of the game before I can judge for myself if I like the game or not, right? Maybe another good example is World of Warcraft. Before World of Warcraft, MMOs have been um, very hard. Like you couldn't even have a job
Yeah.
to be able to experience everything in the game. Like I had to grind for like 10, 15 hours a day. And then I can experience the core fun after like months of doing that. And then World of Warcraft comes out. It's like, oh, like within less than a month, I'm already max level and I'm playing all the in-game content, like raiding, dungeons, etc. Right? PvP, everything, right? So it's a very similar sort of, I guess, game development strategy that we have here of like there's so much built up hardcore things that get in the way of the normal average level players experiencing the fun of RTS. Let's clean it up, kind of thing, right? And then there's maybe this is an interesting one too. So if we look at MMOs, there have been a lot of like what gamers call like WoW killers that have come and gone, right?
Yes.
And when I looked at those WoW killers, what they are is they are trying to make the exact same game as WoW, um, and looking to be a successful game that way. Whereas there have been other MMOs that are chasing after unique, different types of core fun, such as like I guess Star Wars Old Republic is a good example, right? That game is so different from WoW in that the story and experiencing like a more of a single player story based like MMO is kind of the point, right? And and I would say our strategy is more close to that second example where you aren't chasing after the exact same type of core RTS. We are maybe half of the time, right? But the other half is we want to really amplify that strategy and bring a real strategy game to that RTS space as well, kind of thing, right? So does that?
Yes. 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 Especially the Hearthstone example, because I remember when it came out that there was a lot of confusion from friends that I have who had played Magic and who kind of came into it and were like, "Well, what do you mean I don't have to worry about mana?" And it's like, no, just every turn you get one extra mana, and then you just play bigger creatures, and it kind of the the aspect of it was lowering the barrier of entry, kind of removing that intimidation factor. And it feels like Battle Aces is kind of trying to achieve that as well. Like you're making it so that it's easier to jump in. You don't have to worry about the base and your economy as much. Like it's still important, but it's not like don't worry about that. Focus on building your army and having fights. So my next question would be when you're creating the curve essentially of allowing new players that easier access, but trying to maintain something for those hardcore RTS genre fans. How do you go about approaching like making sure that curve works correctly?
Yeah, so this one is a lot more straightforward for us than maybe many other RTSs that try to more approachable. So like when I look at kind of different RTSs that wanted to be more accessible, the focus and the main goal seems to be that, right? Whereas Battle Ace is very different. Our main goal isn't to make an accessible game. Our main one is to make the most fun RTS. And our thought is one of the things that contribute towards making the most fun RTS is removing or heavily reducing these tedious, I guess, tasks that are required for you to master over X number of years before you can experience the core fun kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So because of this, we haven't had much trouble, I guess, keeping the engaged players engaged or keeping the mastery ceiling as high as we have it today, etc. Right? And maybe a good example is this. We've done a lot of small scale tests, ranging from inviting, I guess, our previous former coworkers that are expert developers, as well as our friends that are hardcore or not, never played, never really got into RTS, like all this, and then user research tests, etc. But what we noticed is clearly this is a game where people can just experience the core fun easily. So one example is during UR tests, one of the moderators he told us something interesting, like I've never really seen anyone like after doing this test for the first time ever listing out like your game design values kind of thing, right? So like that really shows that whether you like this type of game or not, at least you can see what we're trying to do immediately on the day one of you playing the game kind of thing, right? And then on the flip side, I think I talked to you about this example last time too, but we had our summit where we invited about 30 people, but two of which were Korean, I guess, pro gamers. And they're saying things like, man, like, this is going to be so impossible for me to master. I thought this was supposed to be an easy game, right? And then we're saying things like, no, this is not an easy game. It's a easy to get into game, but that still has a really high mastery ceiling so that we can satisfy both new players as well as existing hardcore players kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
then they're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then since then we've been talking about like the depth of it, etc. So I believe because our goal is to create the most fun to play for RTS for everyone, um, it's a little bit easier for us to kind of hit that goal of satisfying all skill levels.
Yeah. So when you have, been designing the game and you've had your summit and your beta phase one, was there any area that you thought players were going to enjoy or you thought it was a good idea that you've had to kind of wind back on because you realized it actually kind of hurt the game?
Oh, I see. So we had some fears. Maybe one is we weren't quite sure how the existing RTS players will react. The counters, the building aspect, etc. But to our, I guess, positive surprise, a lot of players enjoyed it, which was good. And then maybe another one was we, we had quite a lot of worries of like, oh, there's no ways that people that enjoy like the old school RTSs still can find Battle Aces interesting, kind of, right? So the surprising thing here, maybe the first example that we saw was also at our community summit. There was Artosis. He's the caster for both Brood War and Starcraft 2, one of the main casters for both games.
Yeah.
And he's very vocal about like, as much as I love Starcraft 2, Brood War is the best, and because of the things that we've cut in our in Battle Aces, kind of. So he names things like the fact that you have to perfectly manage the workers, the production buildings, the supply, like all these added up. This type of execution is what makes Brood War his favorite game of all time, kind of thing, right? So we were super surprised when he came to the summit, and he's not talking to anyone. He's just sitting at his desk, like nonstop playing the whole time, and then he's asking questions like, "Hey, can I skip dinners and then play more because I want to play more," kind of thing, right? So I had a chance to talk to him afterwards, and I'm like, "Hey, like I was honestly not expecting like you out of all people to like this game, kind of thing, right?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm surprised too, but I like it. Like, what can I say, right?" So that kind of gave us another, I guess, um, hope of like, maybe like if we just focus on making a fun game, it can be fun to all types of different people, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, he really does like his Brood War. I was actually watching him
Yeah, right.
stream it the other day, and it's like, wow, really? After all this time? Um,
And it's fine, right?
yeah,
But
no, it's
the
crazy.
fact that, yeah, but I think my personal thought is the fact that Battle Aces is so different of a beast to something like a Brood War is I wonder if that's what maybe helps players like him just not even think about it, and then if they like it, then they can enjoy it, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Whereas something like a StarCraft 2 is so similar to Brood War with, I guess, UI UX improvements. That's why he picks a favorite between the two or something like that. I don't know, right? Just a guess that I had.
What was it about deck building that you thought made it the perfect fit for kind of merging with the RTS genre?
Yeah, so my favorite mobile game of all time by far is Clash Royale. I have like, I don't know, over 20 on 22,000 wins, which I think equals out to like thousands of hours played,
Wow.
right? And my other kind of favorite game is Hearthstone Battlegrounds. And in both of these games, I personally see a lot of the fun in not just the execution. Like I know what to execute if I play these games enough. Like they're very simple games, kind of thing, right? Compared to an RPG. But what's really fun about those games is the strategic element, like the countering, like seeing and reacting, looking for combinations, etc. Like strategizing in general, both I guess in the case of Hearthstone Battlegrounds in game, and then in the case of Clash Royale, both in and out of the game kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So and then at a high level, if we think about it, real-time strategy is a genre, right, where people want to strategize as the army commander. So it was a very, I guess, natural fit in our heads of combining deck building with the core fun of RTS to provide an already known but not existing in the RTS space yet type of really fun, I guess, strategic deck building gameplay. And then we really wanted to marry the two, create a real, I guess, real-time strategy game.
The art when you're approaching designing units for this game, like how did you settle on like the kind of art style you went for, and are there any units that you're incredibly happy with how the designs turned out?
Yeah, so I guess Ted, our art director, or maybe Luke, our one of our two main concept artists, might be able to answer this better. So if you want to connect with them through Bob, that would be good. But yeah, so our stance though is at a high level is readability is one of the most important things in an RTS because there's so many units in play. Armies versus army battles are happening all the time, etc. And how we get that is things like through its unit silhouettes, unit sizes versus the impact of the units. That, for example, splash damage units are generally bigger visually compared to normal units because if you don't recognize splash damage units, then you're going to lose so many of your own units before you realize what it is. So it has to stand out better, kind of
Yeah.
thing, right? And other factors like team colors have to be implemented a certain way, the health bars matter, etc. Right? So all these come together to form, I guess, a great, I guess, readable RTS, which we believe is a requirement. Like without it, nothing else really matters because players will not be able to experience the fun of moment-to-moment combat if the readability is. And then for your second thing, what turned out to be so this was all, I guess, like Luke's vision, the artistic vision, I believe. But personally, what one of the things that worked out the best is using, I guess insects or animals, etc. Like these things that players can easily recognize. So like we have a unit called the dragonfly, and it clearly looks like a dragonfly, even though it's a mech, right? Or
Or the
a crab
crab.
unit,
Yeah.
yeah, clearly looks like a crab, etc. Right? Like locust looks like a locust, and it behaves like a locust. So like these things, I think, were the biggest wins, and I say this because they are creating a brand new IP, and within this space, sci-fi is very tough because there's little, I guess, pre-existing, um, I guess roles or things that players can attach to, as compared to say like as compared to say like fantasy
Yeah.
games. If you look at an archer, then you kind of know what it already does before you try it in action, kind of thing, right? And this is a difficulty that sci-fi has, but I believe our art team has done a great job of kind of mitigating some of this by introducing like, oh, that looks familiar, oh, that looks familiar, and then I know like I feel like a locust, something that is called a locust, something that visually looks like a swarm of locusts when I build it. I can kind of tell what that functionality is, kind of thing, right? So
Yeah.
I believe this was one of the biggest wins that we've had because of our, I guess, art vision that we had for Battle Ace.
Especially with like the bullet as well and the crab, those two to me really stand out. Do you have any
Absolutely.
kind of personal favorites that you're really happy with how they turned out?
Oh yeah, I think we talked about it before, but I think
Yes.
my favorite were the Kraken and the King Crab. So yeah, and I'm also very into Star Wars, and I'm in the process of making my custom King Crab and Kraken lightsaber.
Excellent. That was what I was looking for. I was looking for you to mention
Okay.
the lightsaber. So that's great.
Okay. Well,
Excellent.
thanks again, and we'll see you in beta.
Excellent. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.